Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. And thank you, Italian Trade Commission and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for setting up this event. And thank you, Vito and Seven Numbers, for hosting it. My name is Fil Bucchino. I am a professional olive oil taster. I am a sensory panel judge, producer, and just recently we made a documentary on the obsession of premium olive oil, but that's a different story. So let's get into it. So let's talk about the origins of the cultivated and olive oil. Olive oil of Olea Europea sativa has its cultivation, its roots started in Syria, Palestine, and Iran. And from there we moved into Crete, where there's signs of cultivation over 3000 BC, and then into Greece, and then into the Western Mediterranean. The Etruscans in Lazio and Tuscany were already using olive oil as food 2,500 years ago. And then from there, it was the Spanish missionaries in the 18th centuries that brought it across the Atlantic and into the Americas. When it comes to production, Europe takes the #1 spot with 75% of the world's production. Spain being #1 within Europe. Italy accounts for 16% of the world's production, and since it's La Settimana della Cucina, we're going to do a little bit of a focus on Italy. 60% of the world's production. Italy is the #1 exporter of olive oil as a brand. Not in quantity of actual oil, but as a brand is the #1 exporter in the world. And Greece is the #1 when it comes to consumption. In Greece, they consume about 1.5 liters of olive oil per person per year, which is, depends how much you consume. It's a good amount. So, what is extra virgin olive oil? In the simplest form, it's fruit juice. To be exact, it's freshly extracted, raw olive juice. And when it's done correctly, it is full of flavor and alive. Sensory profiles, it is actually an explosion of flavor and aromas. It's alive. Contrary to popular belief, it doesn't age very well. So there's no such thing as a vintage in olive oil. I know a lot of wine people, there's probably a lot of you here, there's no such thing as vintages in olive oil. It doesn't age very well. And because like any other fresh product or a fresh ingredient, although we tend to find olive oil in the condiment section next to ketchup and mayo in a grocery store, when it's done right, when it's fresh, in my opinion, belongs to the produce section. We're not there yet, and we're going to get into what's fresh and what's not fresh. And there is a whole world to it. I'm going to try to paint, because we are in Canada, I'm going to paint a quick picture. Imagine walking into the LCBO, and one wall just says red wine, the other wall says white wine, no provenance, no varietal, no producer, no vintage, nothing. Just bottles with red wine and white wine on it. That's where the world of olive oil is today. It's changing, but we're not there yet. And just like we have in wine, to link the two, wine has varietals, and we all know about the wine varietals. For the past 30 years, we just bombarded with so many of them. In the world of olive oil, they're called cultivars. Cultivar is derived from the word cultivated varietal, and each one of them has their own sensory profile and characteristics. And in the world, we know of about 2,000 cultivars in the world of olive oil. Italy being in the center of the Mediterranean, and Italy hosting the most diverse microclimates in the world, just because of the peninsula and its geographical location, has 700 of these cultivars. 538 of them are being worked today to produce extra virgin olive oil, virgins, refined, and table olives. Italy as a whole, if you think of it, the varietals in Italy attribute 42% of the world's varietal as a whole, which is pretty impressive. It is seasonal. Obviously, I just got back from harvest in Italy right now. Harvest in the Northern Hemisphere will end in around close to now in December, more or less. And in April, we kickstart the Southern Hemisphere harvest. There's a lot of world that's producing olive oil outside of Italy and the Mediterranean as well. So, tradition versus quality. I'm just going to say it. Making olive oil, it's really easy. All you do is take olives, you take them to a mill of any kind, you're going to get oil. Like, it's literally that simple. There's mills that are made to take your olives and put them through. And tradition is beautiful. We all, if we have roots in the Mediterranean, we all have an aunt or an uncle or somebody that makes olive oil, it's like, oh, I got some trees, I'm going to bring you some tins of olive oil. That's awesome. It's romantic. It's beautiful. It doesn't mean that it's quality. There's two different things, because to have quality, tradition is not synonymous with quality. When we're talking about quality, it depends on the cultivar, the geographical area, the season that year, what happened in the climate. I mean, Italy was bombarded by bad weather. Like the season this year was a disaster in a lot of ways. So climate conditions, the ripeness of the olives. Again, there's no black olive, there's no green olive, it's just olives. They just change maturation, and depending on how you harvest them and when you harvest them will give you a different type of oil. The harvest methods, where the olives hurt during harvest, where they harvest it from the ground, where they harvest it from there's a lot of things, a lot of factions. The milling technology, once you take it to the mill, how clean is the mill? How modern is the mill? What is the expertise of the miller? Storage and cleanliness. And this is a true story, true fact actually. You can take the same olive tree, the same olives, two different producers, put their hands on those olives, and you can get two complete different olive oils. I was just in Italy and Spain right now, and we were running tests in some of the mills, and in one of them we extracted oils with olives that were varying in temperature by 2 degrees Celsius. One of them was awful. It was basically an oil that you could throw away. One of them was passable, and one of them was exceptional. Now, that's just 2 degrees. That's just basically the olives sitting there, waiting to be milled, changing in temperature by 2 degrees. That completely affects the quality of the olive oil. And another thing with olive oil, not contrary, but just different from wine, is that once you go through that process, it's irreversible. There's no chance to correct an oil afterwards because it is a fresh fruit juice. You can't touch it. So if you mess it up, I have seen producers ruin a season of hard work in 25 minutes. So it's very, very important. So how do we determine quality and grade? Officially, there's 2 ways to do it, which is one of them is sensory and chemical. The chemical way is to be labeled from olive oil virgin to extra virgin. You have to go through a certified chemical lab and reach some standards, which we will talk about in a second. And then sensory. When it comes to sensory, also has to go through a certified sensory lab, where olive oil tasters, when we sit in a panel, we do it to classify an oil, whether it's virgin, extra virgin, or lampante. And we will talk about that as well. Am I going too fast? This is good? Okay. I want to spend half a second here to talk about the olive oil grades and just sort of the path of olive oil. It starts at a farm. In the farm, it goes to a mill. Now in modern production, there's no such thing as pressing anymore. The cold pressed conversation doesn't really exist. Olive oil is extracted. It's extracted, it's not pressed. When it's extracted, you're going to get pumice on one side. We're not going to focus on that. And anything that goes through a mill, before it goes to classification, it's called a virgin olive oil. And basically anything that goes through a mill is a virgin olive oil first. And from there we have different varieties of it. So lampante, ordinary, virgin, and extra virgin. Lampante is an oil that is not fit for human consumption, and it's derived from the word lamp, or lampante, lamp oil, which was literally used to light for fire. So that oil, highly defective, and it's sensorily, we will talk about that again when we do the tasting, usually it serves a purpose. Like we try not to throw anything away, and the purpose of lampante is a lot for the industry's oil. Now that oil, it's refined, it's deodorized, it's decolorized, and it's blended with a small amount, undetermined amount of virgin or extra virgin olive oil to be legally called olive oil. So if you go to the grocery store and you see extra light olive oil, light extra virgin, that's an oil that was refined. And we'll talk about refined oil when we talk about cooking with extra virgin. But, and then we got virgins and extra virgins. And sorry, just to finish the lampante. That oil, it's to create an oil for mass consumption, meaning that it needs to be the same every single year. Like when people buy, when a big brand creates a certain sensory profile, they need to repeat it year after year. And you can do it by using chemical changes. When it comes to extra virgin olive oil, we're really talking about an oil, it's a fresh fruit juice. It can't be changed. Meaning that, going back to 2 slides before, depending on the season, depending on the climate condition and the harvest method, it will change. I mean, we harvest every single year, and since 2013, we have the same similar characteristics of the oil because it's the same cultivar, but every year it changes a little bit. And that's a beautiful thing. I mean, that gives you a sign that true agriculture and the art of agriculture is still alive. So these are the chemical characteristics. There's a lot. I mean, when you do a chemical analysis, you can get really deep into pesticides and pages and pages and pages. But these are the three main ones, which is acidity, free fatty acid, peroxides, and delta K. In really broad strokes, when we talk about free fatty acids, it's an indication of the health of the olives prior to harvest, or if the extraction was done correctly or poorly. When we talk about peroxides, it's the amount of rancidity that's already present in the oil. Now, the one thing about rancidity, and I'll say this a few times today, it doesn't matter how good the oil is, doesn't matter how many awards, doesn't matter who made it could be the best of the best of the best, inevitably it will become rancid. It's just this no. Our job is to preserve that oil as much as we can, but it will inevitably become rancid. And then delta K, it's basically a sign of adulteration or refining. So when we go back to the lampante that becomes olive oil, delta K for a lampante is about 0.15. It can be more than 0.15. And when we look at extra virgin or virgin, it's 0.01. That just basically tells you something was chemically touched and something wasn't. When we get into, this is the sensory part, which is the organoleptic characteristics of an oil. And this, again, it's what we do in a sensory panel where we classify an oil. And it's basically classified in a very simple form, determined by the level of fruitiness in an oil, or lack of, and the presence or lack of defects. So when we look at about extra virgin olive oil, to be classified in the most basic term as extra virgin, there needs to be a level of fruit in it and 0 defects whatsoever. A little bit of defects up to a certain point, which is 3.5 on a scale of 10, you become a virgin olive oil, and then over 6 is lampante. So when you're milling, you immediately notice, professional tasters and the millers themselves will know when an oil is lampante right away when the defects are so obvious, and that will go to be refined. So this is a quick little glance, all that this slide shows, is that basically all the little red bubbles, it's the defects, some chemical, some sensory, and where in the chain could happen. And this is very important. I mean, classification of an oil from the sensory panel perspective, the chemical perspective, and even at the award level, it's done sometime between mill and storage. But then past mill and storage, we get into distribution, retail, and our home. And a lot of things can happen there. And this is where, assuming that an oil is perfect up to this point, award-winning, top of the top of the top of the world, we need to maintain, still care of it, or that oil can rancidify. I'm not sure if that's a word in Italian or not, rancidità. But it rancidisce, it gets more rancid really, really fast. I don't think that was English, but both. So, oh yeah, and again, the importance of learning how to taste at home. Because if we learn a little basic understanding of how to taste olive oil, because past this stage, past the classification stage, it's up to us to determine if an oil is good or not. And then once we get into the flavors of an oil, it's about kind of like wine. It's what do you like? Do you like a more delicate oil, a more robust oil? What kind of profile, sensory profiles do you want in an oil? And here we get into the official guidelines. The official guidelines, in essence, prior to 1982, all the olive oil producing countries had their own vocabulary to address olive oil. So when you were trying to classify or talk about somebody's oil, whether you're in Spain, Greece, or Tunisia, everybody was using different terminology. So now, the school that formed me many years ago has created this vocabulary, which is very simple, but it needed to align the vocabulary so that all tasters could be speaking the same language and we could understand levels of fruitiness and levels of defect. And again, it's done in a panel for detected defects and level of fruitiness. It's the purpose of an organoleptic assessment of an oil. And this vocabulary, I know it's very simplistic. It can get very, very complex within each one of them. But in the most basic form, and these are the sheets that we use in a sensory panel, as simple as we determine the presence or the level of fruitiness, the presence or the level of bitterness, and pungency. Those are the 3 positive attributes in an extra virgin olive oil. Bitterness, again, contrary to a lot of people, oh my God, this is too harsh, this is too weird, I'm not sure, it's a good thing. Olive oil that is bitter, it's a good thing. Olive oil that is pungent is a good thing. It tells you, number one, that there is a presence of polyphenols in it, so there's antioxidants, which also means that that oil will preserve itself longer. Now, depending on, it's important to understand the defects, because sometimes the bitterness or the spice, often somebody goes, oh, this is spicy, this is a good oil. The spice can hide defects as well. So it's important to understand a little bit of it all. And then we get into the negative attributes. These are the general negative attributes, and we'll talk about this in a second, the negative ones. That's the profile sheet, very simple. We indicate if a defect, if any kind, the level of it, and the level of fruitiness, spiciness, and bitterness. So, positive attributes. Let's start with fruity. When it comes to fruity, again, it depends on the cultivar and the way that it was made. It also depends on when and how it was harvested. Meaning, an oil that was harvested early in the season will tend to be more herbaceous, greener, alive, more pungent, more bitter. One that's a little later in the season, it's a little more mellow. It's calmer, more subdued. There's no right or wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, that comes down to like the personal preference of an oil. And the way that we detect fruitiness is through ortho and retronasal olfaction. When we talk about the bitterness, again, it's the only taste. Acidity, again, reference to wine, acidity is not perceived with an oil, and bitterness is the only taste that you get in an oil. And it's tasted in the back of your tongue, and it's done usually when the olives were harvested and they were green and healthy. Pungency, again, it's not a taste, it's a tickle sensation. It's a sensation that happens in the back of your throat, and again, is caused by the presence of polyphenols. And depending on the cultivar, it could be very intense or less so. And one interesting thing about the pungency that we will feel in the back of our throat is the presence of a specific polyphenol called oleocanthal. And oleocanthal is nature's ibuprofen. It's basically an anti-inflammatory. So polyphenols in an oil not only give you antioxidant, but also anti-inflammatory properties. And then other positive attributes. When we get into an oil, once we determine that there's grassiness, depending on the cultivar or the season, you will get grass, artichoke, tomato leaf, apple, ripe banana, green banana, and so forth, aromatic herbs. There's literally a never-ending amount of sensory profiles. Negative attributes. So when we smell an oil, if it smells like wet socks, the salami that you left on the kitchen counter for 3 days, if it smells like wet paint, there's a problem. If it smells too sweet, like literally like just like candy almost, something is wrong there too. One of the most common defects is fustiness, and fustiness is, I like to think of it as, people talk about it's the cat pee defects. People say it smells like cat pee. I recognize it by when you open a bag of chips. You know the first woof of air that comes out of a bag of chips? That's how I remember it. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to build our own memory bank to understand and recognize. And it's an anaerobic fermentation defect, and it's usually caused by olives that were amassed. So people, because it's cheaper, I'm going to harvest, I'm going to amass the olives, and once everything is amassed, I will mill. To do properly produce extra virgin olive oil, when people are wondering why is it so expensive, you take it to the mill every 2 to 3 hours. It has to be done quickly, because the moment you remove the olive from the tree, the oxidation process starts. And then there's other defects. And this is the big one, oxidative. The oxidative defect is rancidity. Rancidity is basically the more polyphenols you have, the longer it could be preserved, but it's up to us to preserve and try to take care of that oil. The same way that we try to prolong our own lives by staying healthy and eating well, we got to treat olive oil in a certain way because it is a fresh ingredient and fresh product. Other defects, these other defects are caused by poor harvesting methods or harvesting olives that were frostbitten. It will give you a certain flavor to it that even if you do everything right, if the olive was not healthy, it would transfer into the taste and profile of the oil. One problem that as climate has been changing, especially in the Mediterranean, it's been getting warmer and warmer, and some of the, not to get into the detail, but some of the species, there was a species of bird that would eat the specific larva, so the olive fly was not really a problem, and now it's become a problem because this there's been invasive birds that have come on that have eaten this little bird that used to eat the larva, and now the olive fly is crazy. So we have to constantly fight with the olive fly every year. And when you harvest an oil that was bitten by the olive fly, you're basically harvesting an oil that had the larva of the fly in it. And that doesn't taste very good, as you would imagine. Okay. I think we're not, I'm not sure if everybody has not yet. We're going to talk about the tasting method for a second. Any questions up to this point?
Yes, there's plenty of slots.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I don't know where to start actually, but from the most recent, from taste and evaluation for fruitiness, etc., is there a point with certain cultivars that become overripe? And then you mentioned things that in a wine world, bitterness might be associated with acidity in the wine to help preserve the length. Is there moments with certain cultivars where that dips or drops that you need to harvest at the right time?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on what the producer is trying, the kind of oil that they're trying to harvest,
Okay.
right? So, I mean, and becomes preference as well too. What I've seen in recent years, producers will try to, there's some producers that will only do one kind of oil. So we do a very robust, it's very intense. We're looking for this, try to get the consistency and flavor every single year. Other producer will go more varied. And also, it depends on the geographical location. I mean, if you're harvesting in Tuscany or Liguria or near Garda, northern Italy, it becomes very difficult to harvest very efficiently and very quickly because you've got hills, you've got banks. So it's basically impossible to get all the oil that you want in a certain maturation state. So often producers will do 3 lines. They will do one that's more intense, one that's a little medium, and one that's a lighter oil. Lighter oil usually late harvest.
And is there such thing as like a harvesting at night or using any nitrogen, like cold to sort of keep the grapes fresh when you versus en masse?
Yeah.
Is there any things that they do?
Yeah, there's some producers that have started to do, and I can't speak to it. I'm not sure if it's more of a branding or trying to differentiate themselves. There's a lot of people that do it. There's more and more people that are doing the harvesting at night. Problem with harvesting at night, it's come out that there's birds that sleep in the trees at night, and you're disturbing them, and it's creating different problems. So people are kind of torn in between. Obviously, harvesting at night, cooler temperatures, for sure.
So then, I guess later we can talk about organics and biodynamics if you're talking about the birds and the sanctity of the environment that's
It's, I mean, we do a lot of work with rejuvenating groves and groves that were previously abandoned. And when a grove is abandoned, it creates all kinds of problems, from the animals to the vegetation, and to then eventually when there's floods, when there's fires, they get to be augmented when land is not, especially in the Mediterranean where most of the land has been cultivated for so many years that as soon as you remove the human touch to land, imbalances happen pretty quickly.
Now, would that not be considered something good with like an older tree producing older berries that are more concentrated in flavor and therefore a wilder style of olive oil? Or anything?
No, an abandoned tree usually produces very little olives. Yeah, because what usually happens when you leave a tree, maybe I can't speak to vines or wine. It's not a. But what happens there is that the plant basically gets suffocated. All these vines kind of grow around it. So the olives, they try to reach the top of it, and eventually it burns.
With old olive trees, the older the tree, the wiser the tree, or not?
Yeah, it is. It also becomes they become more difficult to harvest. I mean, harvesting and pruning, it's an insane world because you try to balance the facility to remove the olives at the perfect time to create the profiles that you want, but also you want to be able to help the tree so the tree can be as healthy as it can be. One of the easiest things to do is just let the tree go, but contrary to, again, to popular belief, the bigger it is, the harder it is to harvest and the less it produces, because the olives are fighting for more nutrients, right? Disclaimer, I'm not an agronomist. This is things that I've picked up talking to you. Yeah. Everybody have oil? Cool. So let's start. Let's go in order. I'm going to start with number 1, which is the number 1. Okay, we're going to talk about the tasting method. So, a couple of things. The reasons that we taste. In a panel situation, we taste for market classification. That's when we call it extra virgin, virgin, lampante. But it's also important for us at home to taste for our own market selection. Because then again, once you understand how to taste, you start looking for the oils that you enjoy that work with your cooking, the same way that we do with wine, or just simple preference. It's important, again, this is going back to tradition versus what it is. We don't taste olive oil with bread at all. We taste it by itself. It has to be tasted. We taste wine. We don't take a piece of cheese and then taste wine. We taste wine by itself. We taste olive oil by itself. And the reason why is that as you start combining it with bread, bread can hide or augment a defect or a positive attribute that may not even be there. So we taste it by itself. And again, acidity not perceived in an olive oil. So how are we going to taste it? It's a combination of nose, tongue, and mouth, and together. We're going to start with orthonasal olfaction, which is basically direct smelling. That is the first moment where we'll get an idea of what kind of an oil we're dealing with. Defected, fruity, light, medium, intense. From there, we're going to put some in our mouth, and we're going to squish it around. And that's where we're going to determine the bitterness, the level of bitterness. Is it pleasant? Is it astringent? Is it nice like a dark chocolate or an espresso? Or is it medicinal, that awful bitterness? This is very, and then we're going to stimulate retronasal olfaction, and that's one of the most fun things about tasting extra virgin olive oil, because that's when we blend the aromatic compounds in the oil with your saliva. They go through the back of your throat, into your nose, and create new flavor sensation. That's how we perceive a lot of the flavors. That's what I was saying. The only taste that is truly perceived in olive oil is bitterness. The rest of it is a combination of aroma and retronasal olfaction, aroma and saliva. So this is the tasting technique. I'm going to grab this glass. Oh, very important. Why is there a blue glass? Maybe some of you may know, I'm not sure. We get fooled when you go to the grocery store and you see the bright kryptonite green, phenomenal looking olive oil that looks like fluorescent green in a clear bottle. We'll talk about that. Immediately, you start thinking that it's fresh. It's good. Not true at all. Color has nothing to do with quality of an extra virgin. Doesn't matter what anybody tells you. It has nothing to do with it. I have tried kryptonite green olive oils that were lampante, and I have tried the most unappealing looking olive oils that literally pale white almost with a hint of yellow that were an explosion of flavor and aroma. So we can't let the color fool us, and that's why we taste in a blue glass, because if you look in the glass, you can't see the color. Now there's some people that are tasting there's the red glass. I'm not sure if the IOC, the International Olive Oil Council, has approved the red glass yet, but it serves the same purpose. It's red glasses, there's yellow glasses. The idea is to neutralize the color, because even professional tasters, when you see something green, you can't help but to associate it with freshness. Okay, so we're going to put a little bit in our glass. We're going to cup it with one hand and put the other hand at the bottom, depending if you're right-handed or left-handed. And what we're going to do, we're going to start rubbing it. And the reason why we rub it, we rub the bottom, we want to increase the temperature of the oil. So when we warm it up, also, what does it do? It decreases the viscosity of the oil, increases the vapor pressure of the oil, and increases the speed of reaction of our receptors. So we're going to keep warming. So in this situation, we obviously don't have these little burners, but this works just as well. We warm until we don't feel any difference in temperature between our hand and the cup. When it feels like it's about the same temperature, that oil is ready to be tasted. Once we get to that point, we want to spin the oil around so that the oil coats the inside wall of the glass. Again, it helps to decrease its viscosity and release more aromas. Once we do that, we're going to take a sniff. We're going to smell it. We're going to use our orthonasal olfaction. We're going to take 2 to 3 sniffs max, no more than 30 seconds. And the reason why is that eventually you get desensitized like anything else. If you're around a certain smell for too long, you don't smell it anymore. Following that, we're going to put some in our mouth. We're going to squish it around, and we're going to look for the bitterness, the quality of the bitterness, the intensity of the bitterness. And then we're going to do not a super sexy sound. In the wine world, it's way sexier than in olive oil, and it's called stripagio. What we do with stripagio is that we oxygenate the oil forcefully, and we do that for 2 reasons. One of them is because olive oil sits above the saliva, so we need to spray it so it separates the two, hitting our receptors properly. And the other reason is to stimulate retronasal olfaction. And the way that we do that sound is that we put our tongue close to our top teeth. We open our mouth sort of wide on the side, and we suck air violently, and it sounds like this. Like wine is more like way more delicate and sexy. This is a bit more just oxygenate the oil. Let's just get it in there. So, and when the amazing thing after you do the Stripagio, and in Spain it's kind of cool, and some cultivars are so strong in polyphenols that they don't even do that because, and I've made the mistake, and you literally cough for 5-6 minutes straight with tears coming under your eyes because it's so rich in polyphenols that it's too intense. So even in Puglia, some of the coratinas, if you get them really early, it could be painful, but it's fun. There was something else I wanted to say. Okay, I think we can start. Oh yeah, so the retronasal olfaction, that's where, so with our nose, we're gonna get our first idea of the kind of smells, good or bad, that we get in an oil, and following a Stripagio, we may sense different flavors and different characteristics in the oil. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's completely different, and it gets pretty fun. Are we ready to go? Anybody want to try giving a thought? Straw? Paglia, è un pochino di paglia, diciamo. Sì, ok. Yeah, for sure. Some tomatoes in there too. What kind of tomato? Are we looking more ripe tomato? It's more ripe tomato, right? There's a ripe tomato in there. There's grass, like fresh cut grass. Po di rucola. It's very aromatic, very herbal, this oil. Now, when we're smelling it, there's a little hack. I mean, once you get it close, the closer you get it to your nose, it means the lighter the oil is, right? So I mean, this one here, to really get a feel of it, we have to get in there. Once you get in there, it's there. It's a good, fresh, I'm not even gonna tell you what I had to do to get these oils here. These are new harvest oils. These about 4 weeks ago were all olives. And so these are as fresh, probably the freshest oils that we're gonna taste in Canada for the next 3 months are here today. And anything else? Tomato leaf, for sure. Yeah. See, this one, it's a little closer to a ripe tomato than a tomato leaf, but it's definitely tomato. A little bit of artichoke. Yeah, there's a little bit of artichoke. I think we should taste it, and we see what else comes up. So before we even go further, isn't it interesting that we just drank oil and your mouth is clean? What? Like, we just ate a fat and your mouth is perfectly clean. That's also a sign of an oil being fresh. Anything different? And what kind of bitterness? Is it intense? It's a medium. It's a light to medium. It's a pleasant bitterness. It's a calm bitterness. It's not over intrusive. And the same with the spice. Same with the pungency. It's not. You're not coughing. You're not. There's a nice tickle that's persistent, but it's not how we say in Tuscany. It's not a legnata. Like it's not like it doesn't hurry you too much. So this is a delicate oil. This is considered to be a delicate, calm oil. This is a monocultivar from Sicily, very, very beautiful, calm oil. This is an oil that's not going to drastically change the consistency or the flavor of your dish when you use it. Cultivar? Yeah, it's called a Biancolilla. Biancolilla, yeah, it's called a Biancolilla. This is a very typical Biancolilla. There's grass. Yeah, it's very, I mean, at the end of the day, it's very, one of the important things too, it needs to taste and smell fresh, and this is fresh. There's no doubt, whether we like it or we can determine what's in it or what's not, it's a fresh oil. So we need to start with that. Like, there's no need to overcomplicate it, One thing that the wine industry did really well, which I always, when I have conversations with producers, is the wine industry said, red wine meat, white wine fish. So even the most basic humans, like, I understand that, I can do that. When it comes to olive oil, they're like, we got 700 cultivars, we got 20 million flavors. Like, whoa. I thought it was just called olive oil. What's going on here? So there's a little bit of a disconnect. So I think starting with, it's fresh. It's a good point. I'm not getting, there's nothing bad in this oil, like at all. Should we move to number 2? So again, we're going to warm it up, try to get the temperature the same in our hands. Now swirl the glass around to make sure that we're coating all the walls of the glass. And we're going to smell. It's possible. Yeah, for sure. No acidity. You wouldn't be perceiving acidity. No, it would be maybe there's, maybe some of the receptors are firing. Yeah. Yes.
You know, when we taste wine, we're often interested in the finish, the length of the finish.
Yep.
So the first one is quite interesting that it sort of gains some heat. Not
Yep.
initially, but a few seconds after.
Yep.
Is that part of the tasting profile?
Absolutely. Like it changes, and again, those are the little things that kind of can change every year. Even the same Biancolilla by the same producer tasted every year, every different harvest will change a little bit. So I mean, I find it to be a very pleasant attribute in an oil when the pungency sometimes is really persistent, like in the attack and the release. Sometimes the attack is really strong and it stays strong for a long time. Sometimes it's strong and it decays really quickly. This one just kind of grows and it's a pleasant and but it's still persistent. I can still taste it.
But do you use the word finish or in wine?
We use pungency. Pungency, use finish as well too. Yeah, for sure. Peppery finish. Yep, absolutely.
One question. There's sort of competition regarding the extra virgin olive oil, like that, okay, that smell belongs to Biancolilla, that smell belongs to Anaerobic Characteristics.
See, yes. So yes and no, because assuming that all the same producer, it's also a complicated question, great question, complicated to answer, because olive oil changes every day. The moment that it's made, it changes every single day. And I have tasted, eventually, the characteristics, let's say, of a Moraiolo Toscano will change. Some of the bitterness will remain, some of the spice will remain, but over time, the bitterness tends to prevail and things kind of change. So to know a cultivar from another one, if you're tasting it right away, very difficult. Very difficult. However, when they're fresh and they're done right, a Frantoio has their characteristic, and you can tell that it's a Frantoio. A Biancolilla, a Tonda Iblea, or this one here that we're going to taste. This is very characteristics. So I mean, producers will have different. Let's talk about this after we taste this one. It's a great question.
So which leads to this the next question that finishes on the front there. When you have a monocultivar, olive oil X, so that says X, X, X. It's really not about the cultivar, it's really about the process and the method and how it's sitting at when we get it at home. So
it's both. It's both, because a cultivar will give you, doesn't matter if when it's produced correctly, the characteristics of the cultivar will always be there.
Yeah.
I guess what I didn't explain properly is that with time, those characteristics change.
Sure.
So if I'm sitting here 6 months into a harvest, and you've got a Tonda Iblea and Itrana together, very difficult to tell them because they have the same similar profile.
But the quality level should still be there based on how we taste it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So it's still, I'm not saying that it's inbound, just sort of trying to decipher, we have Takayashi at home, or, the Iswas, whatever, when you actually taste them, yes, from the vine, from the tree, you taste the difference. How do you rate the quality, and how do you judge, like a single vineyard in a wine?
Okay, so how do you,
okay. It could be, it's great,
So the way that we, like in competitions, when the oils that get a lot of awards, the ones that win, the ones that are the top of the top, are the ones that are very complex. And the complexity, though, it's determined by how easily you can also determine each one of the sensory profiles of that oil.
Okay.
So often you want to, when you're tasting oil, oh my God, that's artichoke, that's almond, very distinct. At times when they blend together, you're sort of going, okay, I got a bit of this and I got a bit of that. It's a bit distorted, not super clean.
Usually clarity.
The clarity, or at times another one too is the bitterness. How pleasant is the bitterness?
Okay.
Is it astringent or is it a pleasant bitterness?
Perfect. Okay. Yeah,
Right?
So we're measuring all, even if it's not cultivar, we're going to taste.
Like Puglia, the region of Puglia, and this is a shout out to 7 Numbers in Puglia, is Coratina was an oil that was used as a cutting oil because it's very strong, so you use it to cut different oils. And now there's producers that are making some of the best oils in the world, and they're able to maintain a very incredible level of bitterness because Coratina is very strong. It's very, very pungent, extremely pungent. But when you maintain a clean level of bitterness and spice in balance, it becomes a very beautiful and harmonious oil, even though it's very strong, right?
Okay. Perfect.
I think we're ready to taste this one. So right off the bat, in the smelling, do we have to get, I'm not trying to lead it, but I mean, does the nose need to get that deep into the cup to smell it as the first one? No, like around here, you're already smelling, you know that there's something. So it is a medium oil all day long. It's not light, it's a medium oil. Now there's one sensory profile that is very evident here. Anybody want to take a shot at it? There's no wrong answers really, but there's one, once you know, you know. I'll say it.
Yes.
Grass, 100%. Fresh cut grass for sure, but tomato vine, tomato leaf. This is very evident tomato leaf, tomato vine. Foglia di pomodoro, I mean, if you close your eyes, this could be spaghetti with pomodoro on top of it. Like you don't almost, and this is very, going back to your question, it's very common. It's the main sensory profile of this cultivar, which is an Itrana from Lazio. Itrana. Are we ready to taste? See the peppery finish in this one? Going back, completely different, right? This is almost more like da-da-da-da-da, like it just kind of hits you. It's not very aggressive, lingers, amazing bitterness. And the tomato, retronasally, this is an oil that, through the rectal faction and retronasally, the tomato almost intensified in the mouth.
There's more balance.
More balance.
A lot of almonds oil.
A lot of almond too. It's very nice. I enjoy this oil very much. So this is a medium oil, and even, yeah, it's great. We ready to move to number 3?
Sorry, was there like disease that was affecting the olive tree?
Yeah, the Xylella fastidiosa. Yeah, it knocked out a lot of Puglia, and
Yeah, I was in Puglia and that was the
yeah. They've contained part of it, but part of it they still haven't quite figured out how to stop it yet.
Does it spread to the other regions?
It's spreading, yeah, it's spreading, and they found some cultivars that are like the Lecchino cultivar seems to be resistant to the Xylella. So a lot of farmers are changing and replanting Lecchinos to avoid it, which in some ways it's interesting, but it changes also the regionality of a certain cultivar with the cuisine. I mean, going back to Puglia, the Coratina, it's almost like it was, what grows together goes together. It was almost built with the dishes from Puglia. Lecchino is a light oil. It's a great oil, but it's very light. Nothing to do with the Coratina. It's like opposite ends of the spectrum.
Is there a site or space where we can find the classic tasting descriptors, or that you
Yeah, there's more and more books coming out of it. It's kind of interesting. There's a yeah, like I mean the descriptors of an oil. It's funny. Like I read a lot in all the publications that come out, and sometimes depending on the producer or whatnot, you'll see different things on it. You're like, oh my gosh. So it's almost like you need to taste a lot.
Right. It's just then you do your own deciphering based on what you want to say.
Yeah, you do, but again, because it is part art and part science,
Yeah.
when we taste in groups of 8 or 12
Right.
to ensure that we're all calibrated and basically tasting the right thing, and that there's no bias. Even the oil that we produce, when we produce it, I'll taste it and make it the way I want to make it, but then you put it to a sensory panel and different professional tasters to ensure that you're on track. Because it changes, right?
Question on that. Would you be tasting blind, or
Sorry?
would you be tasting these olive oils blind, or would they be open to
Always blind.
It's
Always
always blind.
blind.
Now, could it categorize it at all?
Yeah, we just
Cultivars versus-
no. Initially, no. When we do like in competitions, we don't classify the cultivars. We classify the quality of the lightness, the mediumness, or the intensity of that oil, and the complexity within that category of how clean of an oil it is.
So you'll get everything all at once.
We get everything all at once, and sometimes that's why some of the competitions now they're changing it, where you don't, because if you taste a Coratino, you taste a Moraiolo from Tuscany, and then you taste a Tajasca from Liguria or a Biancolilla, you will bury it. You won't even be able to smell it, or you won't be able to judge it. So we usually judge all the light ones first, and then move up. Even now, we're going light, medium, and getting more intense.
I had the producer, primarily a wine producer, but they were also from oil. Explain to me when we were talking about the disease that you're having, the trees that were higher elevation were a bit safer, the problems were more lower elevation. Is this airing?
I can't really speak to the way that a bacteria moved. I know that it seemed to move very easily from tree to tree and wiped out. Literally, like half of the region was wiped out by it. So,
And is it still, because this is maybe like, I had this conversation maybe 10 years ago. Is it still advancing north in Italy?
it's still advancing north. Yeah, it's still advancing, but not as drastically as before. But this harvest, the problem was the heat, rain, the drought. Like there's always with cultivation, it seems to be every year there's something new. And the difference when you think about wine versus olive oil, you need more land to produce olive oil. It takes longer to make to get a tree to full fruition. It's 10 to 15 years, versus a vineyard is again, I'm not a wine expert, but it takes a few years, less time. Then you have the other issue that, like we were saying earlier, in 20 minutes you can throw away a season with olive oil. With wine, you can try to rectify what happens afterwards. And these are things that we don't think about when we think about olive oil, right? It's changing. In the past 5 years, I think it's getting, people are becoming more educated, and but we're far away. I mean, we'll talk about the enemies of olive oil. There's a lot of them. Are we ready to smell this one? And?
Mango.
Yeah, this is tropical. Now, does it smell familiar? Notice, I want to say, I notice how everybody's like, this is great. It's balsamic, yeah, for sure. It's sweet, super sweet. So I was nice. This is not a very heavily defected oil, but this is a defective oil. Are we ready to taste it? And we'll talk about it in a second. But let's talk about this, actually, before we taste it. What does it smell like? We're talking about mango, tropical fruit, very ripe. Do you smell the there's a hint of rancidity in this oil? That's something that's not super clean. There's a little bit of. This is our oil. This is our everyday oil. This is what we go to the store and buy and go, awesome. This is great. I love it. Are you ready to taste it? Is your mouth pasty?
Yes.
How pasty is your mouth? Do you hear that aftertaste? Like almost like it's dark, like this darkness to it. Like that's rancidity.
Like dusty.
It's dusty. It's dirty. This is rancid. This is what we put in our dishes every day.
It's very spicy in the end.
You find it spicy?
Back of the throat and it's spicy.
I find that I would say spicy. I would find that the bitterness is completely and totally distorted here.
Yeah.
This is. I feel like I just took an aspirin and just chewed it.
Yeah.
This is not like I'm having a coffee. This is just, my mouth is still dirty. This is it's a fusty oil. It's a rancid oil. I had a worse one to try, but I didn't want to ruin the last one. So we just grabbed a commercial one, just off the shelf.
Can you easily pinpoint where it became rancid in the cycle, or is it a combination of factors?
Okay, so rancidity, it's a tough one to pinpoint.
Yeah.
Because inevitably, like we were saying, every olive oil will eventually go rancid. Obviously, the better it starts, the less number of peroxides, the higher number of polyphenols. Polyphenols is the first line of defense against rancidity. So when you get a good oil, when you spend money in a good oil, before you even get near rancidity, all the polyphenols need to be depleted. It's almost like a bank account. Like before you end up on the street, like your bank account needs to be completely depleted. That's the polyphenols in an oil. So rancidity starts with poor harvesting methods, poor extraction methods, and then it's sped up by the way that it's kept. Was it heated? Was it exposed to light? Was it exposed to oxygen? So now going back to the beautiful tradition of family friends, and family that brings you the big tins of olive oil. What happens in a big tin? You get it, you're like, amazing, I got 5 liters. You use a little bit, you keep kind of putting it in. In the meantime, that tin, the oil decreases, and the empty space increases. That's oxygen. You're expediting the speed of oxidation without even thinking about it. So what I say to people all the time is like, hey, you're not sure how much money to spend on it. First of all, start thinking about what do you use? How much olive oil do you use? And buy the bottle, like a 500 ml bottle of a properly produced oil. Once you open it, you got about 4.5, 6 weeks before you start feeling any changes in the composition of the oil. Something like this was probably wrong the moment it started, even before. I can't say if it was adulterated. I can't say that. I'm not sure. But there's rancidity here. There's fustiness here. I'm not going to say mufa. Initially, I thought mufa were like, my gosh, how do you say it in English? Is, yeah, like musty, like humidity. Like that's another defect that you don't smell. Rarely ever you detect it in your nose. But once you taste it, it tastes like that wet basement. And then you can't shake it. You can't shake that flavor. And then marca is the worst. We'll talk about that filter. I think we should cleanse before we try that. Like maybe, even a piece of bread, or if you have some prosecco or some water, just wash away that awesome flavor.
There's some kind of food you recommend for extra virgin olive oil to be fair.
Great question. So I mean, lighter to medium oils, I like lighter dishes. I don't know, some cheeses, fish, some salads. But then again, and the only reason I would say that, I would say that about the light ones over the more robust ones. And we're going to try some of these oils in different, we're going to have some little assaggini, and we're going to try the different oils in different food to see if it changes it or if we can perceive a difference. The reason why I would say that is because when it's more intense, you can play with harmony and contrast. Sometimes you can have an intense oil, usually an intense oil on meat will bring out flavors that you probably never, when you do it, when it's a good oil on a good piece of meat, the first time I've had good oil on a good piece of meat, flavors of the meat come out that I've never tasted before. There's actually a chemical reaction that happens. It's an ingredient. And that's the important thing. It's understanding that a biancodilla from a nitrana that we tried right now, they're two complete different profiles. And now it's just about how you want to mix them up. A lot of it is subjective. I know chefs that, a good friend of mine in Italy, that he loves curatinas on mozzarella. And initially, it's sort of counterintuitive because you got a really strong, it kind of drowns it out. But he was telling me that basically the milk in the cheese neutralizes the bitterness of the curatina, and then only the good flavors come out of the curatina. So I'm like, okay, sounds good. Number 4, if we're ready to go. Any thoughts on the smell of it? It's very, very much different than the other two. Obviously, doesn't smell like socks. This is, again, the freshness is back in this oil. Also very different than the other ones. Ooh. Right? Let's talk about it. So this is an interesting oil on the fact that the mouth tells you a lot more than the nose did, right? Like it exploded. And your mouth is just like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Nose, you're like, okay, it's fruity, it's vegetable. There's a lot of green, there's artichoke, a lot of artichoke. But retronasally, following Stripagio, very, very strong. Okay, so a couple of things about the strong here. The bitterness and the pungency are very balanced. Very clean, both very intense, pleasant, very persistent. But here, remember before it was like a nice little tickle. This is black pepper. It's still in there. It's still burning. To me, taste-wise, it's almond. There's deep almond, there's artichoke. Arugula, ooh. Swallowed it too fast. And this is a blend.
On behalf of the Italian Trade Commissioner Marco Saladini, who has been running the visit in Montreal of the ambassador of Italy, Andrea Ferrari. The Week of Italian Cuisine in the World is an initiative developed to promote regional culinary traditions, food and wine connoisseurship as a distinctive trait of Italian identity and culture. We believe and rely on recovery and resurgence. These last days, we restarted the educational testing sessions in person. 2 weeks ago, we hosted a master class of premium wines on Consorzio Vini d'Abruzzo with John Zappo. Last week was the turn of an extensive tasting of premium Italian wines awarded by the Italia Guidebook Gamberus. Next Monday will be the start of the 26th edition of La Grande Degustazione, the primary event for Canadian professionals on the wine, agents, sommeliers, restaurants, and hospitality industry owners. Now, today, we are immersing ourselves into extra virgin olive oil with Fil Bucchino. I thank you. And he has illustrated the characteristics, testing needles, and insights from the olive groves ground where the harvest is just ended these days. So, ladies and gentlemen, the spread of education and information about consumption of premium extra virgin olive oil among the multicultural Canadian society for us is crucial. There is still a lot to be taught and acknowledged. And you, ladies and gentlemen, will echo the suggestion of value and tasting of this ancient and extraordinary product of Mediterranean agriculture. This precious product is a natural fruit of centuries-old olive trees. It is no longer considered a mere condiment, but a food in all respects. Hydrocarbons, vitamins, phenols, and triglycerides make it a rich food, the protagonist of the Mediterranean diet today, and the new nourishment of tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you and enjoy. Bravo Phil, grazie.
Grazie a lei.
Poi io ti voglio vedere, ti voglio vedere poi al basso, perché l'olio è importante, però la musica è musica.
La musica è olio, è sempre, siamo sempre
È un bel vino, è un bel vino. Significa che si fa divertire.
vero.
Sappiamo prendere le cose che
Certo.
Filter, but it goes down to tradition again. When you filter, you got to think like the mindset of the average person that makes olive oil, as we talked about, it's easy. They only got one thing in their mind, yield. I'm bringing you 100 kilos of olives, give me the most amount of oil that you can. When you filter, every time you filter, you lose a little bit. So you're paying, because in the mill you pay for the olives that you bring, and then you don't pay for it. Whatever you get, you get. So you're looking for millers that give you more yield. More yield means, I'm not going to get into usually when you start striving for yield, it's synonymous with not very good quality. So never unfiltered. Again, never in large tins, we talked about that. If you're buying the best before date, it's not indicative because there's rules in the European Union that the 18-month expiry date is from the date of bottling, meaning that the rule actually says that I can create an oil today and I can change from one bottle to the other bottle, and as soon as it changes bottles, the 18 months starts again. And the reason why they can do that, obviously because they aid the industry, and I'm not going to get into the politics of that, and that's totally fine. But the reality is that olive oil doesn't really become poison. They haven't really figured out, they haven't seen anybody died from olive oil consumption. Even if you're consuming the most rancid and disgusting oil, it still doesn't kill you. So you can get away with preserving the life for many, many, many years. In fact, in World War II, past World War II, yeah, people were so afraid that another world would onset that they were saving the oil. No, you can't touch oil. Keep it away for 2 years just in case it's a war. And that's the oil that we grew up using. So we all grew up accustomed to eating and consuming rancid and defective oil. So it's very hard, especially from the Mediterranean, when you have roots in the Mediterranean, it's very hard to break that tradition. There are some regions of Italy where morchia, or muddy sediment, probably the most awful of all defects, it's considered a good quality because people are just used to tasting that oil. And if I was going to bring you guys a morchia to taste, but if you tasted a morchia, you wouldn't taste the oil after that and you wouldn't taste your food. Because it just, you can't shake that taste out of your mouth. And there's some oils that have it. Mild levels of it, I was going to bring maybe one more indicative, but morchia is a bad problem. I think that's it. Yeah, so again, price and label should not be indicative of quality. The important thing is learn how to taste. And to learn how to taste, whether it tastes bad or like fruit, pretty simple. We don't have to get into the details. It's just a pretty simple analysis of taste it. Put it in your mouth. Don't put it on bread. If it leaves your mouth dirty, that's a quick one too. If it leaves your mouth dirty, it's late. Could be a tired oil. Could be an oil that could have started out amazing, but it's 2 years old. It's 3 years old. And we got to remember, we are on this side of the Atlantic. I'm not even going to tell you what I had to go through to get these oils from producers. I have to pull a lot of favors to get those oils shipped to me in time to come back for this class, but it has to travel. So usually new harvest oils get here that are 2-3 months after they've been harvested. And at times, I used to often bring oil by boat, and you don't know when the boat is being held up, if it's at the port, if it's getting heat. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So the important thing is just taste it. If it tastes good, then you're good. And then, simple as that.
Usually when you ship wine, you have to let it settle down for a little bit. Let it sit. Settle the sediment and all that. You have to do the same with the other.
No, so we talked about being a fresh ingredient, being a fresh. There's discussions about the effect of cold on it. There's some studies that have come out that if you separate the oil in 100 ml bottles or smaller, you can freeze it as long as you want, and when you thaw it out, it retains its properties. I've heard good cases pro and against. In my own personal experience in the past 12 years, I find that when an oil is frozen and then thaws out, the quality changes. Something changes in it. Not necessarily bad, but it changes. There's a change to it. And especially, the worst one is when it gets heated, when it gets really hot, and then it cools down. So heat is worse than cold, but up to about 5, 6, 7 degrees for a few hours or a day, it's okay. I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.